My chapter in the book is about values and leadership. By values, I mean unconscious motivational values, not philosophical values that we're conscious of or that we've learned, like Christian values or Muslim values or liberal values out of a book or what we've been taught. But the values that operate on everybody in the world motivationally, but like a slow current, they've been likened to the tides that underlie changes in societies. And you can look at them at a level from the individual to a group, to a nation, any organisation, or between countries, and a lot of academic research has been done on it. In the chapter, Leadership in the Anthropocene, Pat Dade and I write about the insights that we've gained that may be relevant to future leadership challenges from years of work with his model, which is called cultural dynamics. And there are other models, but it's the one which I've found in my work with a lot of NGOs and governments and other organisations as a communications consultant to be the most useful, perhaps the single most useful thing that I ever discovered in decades of looking at tools which help you communicate and get change effectively. It's a big subject, but essentially there are three large groups of people that his model breaks any population into, and it tells you more about that in the book, and they're called settlers, prospectors and pioneers. And these are essentially Maslowian groups, so they're distinguished by having different unmet needs, and that manifests itself in different perceptions about what's common sense, about how we tell right from wrong, about what signals right and wrong, about how the world really works. Fundamental truths, things that we look out through as sets of values rather than things that we're conscious of on a day-to-day basis. And in order to generate the model, they look at thousands of people over and over again and measure their attitudes and beliefs in thousands of different ways, boil that down to hundreds, and then use that to construct the model that you can actually see examples of in the book. It's been used by many organisations ranging from Unilever to Greenpeace to the US Marines. And when people encounter choices or challenges in life, they're very influenced, whether consciously or not, mainly unconsciously, by what feels right, how the world really ought to be, and how my family ought to be and how I try to make it, and then how the country ought to be as a result. And those are very different for different values groups. And since the 1970s in the UK, the balance of these three groups has turned upside down. So what used to be the largest group, the settlers, who are socially conservative, don't like change because it brings risk, and try to maintain a sense of identity and to manifest that because they want safety and security, because they haven't yet fully met those needs in their lives, were the largest group, and they're now the smallest group in this society. And the same pattern has been seen across all the developed countries. If you look in developing countries, where they've got rapidly growing populations, now often young, a generation or two ago, most of those people in that country would have been settlers, but now they're a minority, and most of them are the second group, the prospectors. And those are what Maslow would have called outer-directed people, looking out to others for signals all the time, looking for signs of success and trying to become successful, trying first to get esteem of others, and then once they've got that, self-esteem, which is somewhat more difficult. And so when you add up all the surveys we've done around the world, that most of the world is prospector at the moment. And those societies, if there are no massive disasters which stop social improvement which has been measured by other people, like in the Hans Rosling in the Gapminder model, for example, we can expect to see gradual shift of those prospectors into becoming the third group, which are known in the model as pioneers, or what Maslow called inner-directed people. Now, most of the people who are likely to buy this book and worry about leadership for a green world, the default is that most of those people are going to be pioneers in this third group. And the reason I got interested in this model when I was working for Greenpeace was trying to understand why it wasn't just those sorts of people who were being attracted in the late 80s, early 90s to the cause of the environment, and thinking that there was something fundamentally wrong with the way we were running the world. But nearly all the people who were engaged in organizations trying to make those changes happen that were necessary were pioneers, and they were projecting their way of thinking at the other groups, and that tended not to work because the other groups had other concerns, other more pressing priorities: the need to be safe, the need to survive, the need to ensure that you look after kith and kin first before you begin worrying about much else, for settlers, and the need for success in whatever way that was manifest in society at the time. And for a long time it has been material success. And these pioneers who'd already met those needs were often critical of them, and that could lead to conflict across values groups. Now, people will tend to have most of their friends in the same values groups as they do, unless there are other things tying them together, like it might be family ties, it might be supporting the same football club, it might be some community organisation they're involved with, or it might be other needs, these ligatures, these connections, which I call the social elastic. And in the past, this has often been maintained by forces that we can't change, such as the need to get along with people in a society or at work, just because we depend on them to get things done. Social media has exacerbated the tendency to talk to like-minded people in like-minded ways, and has made us more vulnerable to schisms and fractures along values lines, which is exactly what happened with the Brexit referendum in the UK, which we talk a bit about in the book. One of the lessons we draw from it is that you need to maintain this social elastic, and that's a big challenge for leaders, whilst at the same time understanding how values are affecting things like responses to climate change and what priorities people have. One of the things which I think is the most dangerous in values terms is what I call values bombing, which is political correctness, for example, where the pioneers, who are the people who are most interested in new change and think that large complicated problems can all be solved and they're not intimidated by them, like climate change, for example, will tend to run ahead of the rest of society, and then may succumb to the temptation to criticize other people for not wanting to change and not recognize the reasons why they don't want change, that the pioneers think is self-evidently necessary, unless it helps them meet those needs. So respecting the diversity of needs that people have is one of the things that we argue for in the chapter. And fundamentally, there are two dynamics going on here, which any social conflict or development or debate will tend to be influenced by. One is that generationally, and as work by Ron Inglehart at Michigan University has shown in great detail in the World Values Survey, another survey, social conditions improve, education, emancipation of women, health, and so on. And that has made societies tip towards being more equally split between the three groups, and then moving towards being pioneer weighted, more inner directed. The United States is a good example of that over the last 20 or 30 years. That means that's caused by people meeting their needs and moving from being settlers to prospectors to pioneers. There is another dynamic, hence the name of the model, which is change. So innovation moves from the pioneers. If it looks successful, it gets adopted by the prospectors. Think, for example, of electric cars or other technologies and how they've moved across groups in society from experimentation into the mainstream, and mainstream usually means prospector. And then eventually it's adopted by the settlers because the settlers want to maintain a sense of being normal. So that's the other dynamic, the change dynamic, which is much faster. We can't change very easily, even in our own families, let alone a society. Deliberately change the values composition in these terms of a society, but we can make sure that we design change so that it brings everybody along with the minimum of friction, and we avoid breaking the social elastic.